Hello everyone, this is Ross, and I got a really good video for you guys. Holy shit, this is it's long overdue, really, for the whole fig community as a whole, which is cutting season, and the do's and don'ts and things I've learned, and really just my advice on the whole thing here. So there is a thing called cutting season, and it ranges from right about now, which is the beginning of the fall, when things go dormant for people, into the beginning of the spring. Sometimes people sell cuttings into the spring. And realistically, it can be very daunting. It can. And I think you can make a lot of mistakes during cutting season. Last cutting season, as an example, I purchased like $2,000 worth of sticks, only to have maybe half of what I purchased or traded for actually root for me, if I was lucky. So it's not easy, and you don't want to get too carried away. Lots of people, their advice is to new growers of fig trees is do not get carried away. That's like the number. If you get anything out of this video, it's that. Do not get carried away. If you have fig fever, slow it down. In fact, when I interviewed a lot of people at the Staten Island Fig Festival, that's what they said is, do not get carried away too quickly, because I think I had somewhere around 400 or 500 sticks last year. And that's just a lot of sticks. That's a lot of cuttings. I mean, a lot. Think about if you put every cutting in a 4-inch container, that's 500 containers, 400 containers. 4 times 500, you're looking at a lot of space and you have to take care of them. There are lots to look after. I would say at the most, if you're trying to root varieties, only go for at most 10 or 15 at one time. I'm talking about at one time. So only have like 10 or 15 at most containers that you're rooting. More than that, you're going to get like way carried away. You're going to get burnt out. And then if you think about it, those sticks turn into trees. So they're only so small, in the beginning, but then they get huge. It's hard to imagine, I know, and you want to grow figs as soon as you can. You want to get figs in your belly as soon as you can. That'll come, really, it will, faster than you think. So don't get too carried away. And the other reason I think it's important not to get too carried away is that a lot of varieties are the same, very similar to other varieties. Maybe not the same. I'm usually one to jump to conclusions and say that they are the same. I'm a lumper. There's things called lumpers. There's people called splitters, and those are people that just are willing to group things together versus spread them out. And if a fig was bred from this place, but the other one comes from this place, I don't care where they came from or how they got there. They're actually they taste very similar, they look very similar. They're not the same fig, because one was bred over here and one was discovered over here, but in the end it doesn't make sense to have both. It doesn't. You're trying to find the tastiest of the two, and you're trying to find the most productive and maybe in the most hardiest, and there's a few different things you're looking for, but in the end they're kind of interchangeable, and that's what I think especially a new grower wouldn't know. Even some experienced growers, you see a fig or you have a bunch of figs and they all kind of blend together, you kind of can't differentiate them. When I was first starting out, I would see a fig on the forums, and I would say, "Oh my God, the fig looks great. Has a lot of good reviews. I'm going to go after it. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to go on eBay, and I'm going to purchase these cuttings. People said it's good. I'm going to go after it." There's a lot of hype about it, but that's just the wrong way to go about it. First off, hype is a bad thing in our community. It's bad. It's really bad. fig, people choose varieties. It's very cyclical in how they choose varieties. I can make a video right now and I could say, oh my god, this variety is amazing, and show it to you and show you the fig and just make all kinds of orgasmic noises when I'm eating. But you know, you could see that video and you'd be like, oh my god, this fig is great. You know, I kind of respect what Ross says sometimes. He's a little crazy, but you know, sometimes he's you know, he's got at least a good opinion at this point. He's been growing figs for a while, so not a while, but you know, you get the point. What I'm trying to say is that I'm gonna go purchase this one and I'm gonna add it to my wish list, and then people will see it on your wish list and be like, oh my god, this person wants this fig, let me go research it. Then they find the fig, and then they find the video, and then people are like, oh my god, I gotta get this one. And then it's like a cyclical thing where, you know, everyone wants this fig now for some reason, just because I said I like it. Whereas it could be a horrible fig. It could be a horrible fig in your climate. It could have just been a good year for me. There's a million different things, and to say that a fig is amazing and go after that just based on one opinion is kind of crazy, and I did that a lot last year. Nowadays what I do is I try to do as much research as I can, because I'm such short on space. I have a pretty good collection as it is, but I'm still looking for varieties that I think have just floated under the radar. You know, I think those are really the varieties worth looking for at this point. Because I know there's a lot of Pons varieties, a lot of Andreas varieties. There's a lot of varieties overseas that are probably really good, but they're a little bit more mysterious. They're more expensive. So I think a better alternative is to look kind of what we already have, you know, in the United States and say, or in Canada, and say, okay, this does well here, this does well here, but no one really is interested in it. And you're like, why is that? You know, I'm trying to figure that out for myself. And I think that's the best thing you can do when you're buying a fig variety or a variety of any fruit at all. Is do the research yourself and figure it out for yourself. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You know. You know, I have a spreadsheet and I have a whole list of figs that are very, very, very similar to the other varieties of figs. It's almost as if, you know, I don't want to say that, but it's almost as if someone just literally found a fig, named it whatever the hell they wanted, and it's actually the same thing as something that's already been out there for, you know, a while. But that happens. You know, you can't really avoid that. People are going to do whatever the hell they want to do. So what you need to do is do your research and have a trained eye. And I found there's probably somewhere in the 60 range of named varieties of Mount Etna types or Hardy Chicago types. And if you were to line them all up one by one, they'd be very similar in taste, in leaf structure, in the appearance of the fig. I mean, they're just very similar figs. And I think there's a few groups like that are very similar. And if you're like me, someone that's short on space, you might not want to get 4 or 5 varieties of those because they are very similar. You might only want to get 1 or 2. So it's important to do your research. In fact, when I bought these cuttings last winter time, I had probably around 10 or so Mount Etna varieties and had no idea. No idea. I just saw the great reviews of these figs and thought, wow, these are great, I should get them. You know, they're pretty cheap. Why are they so cheap? Well, that's why they're so cheap, is because Hardy Chicago is essentially the same thing. There's other groups like that, like South Corleone has a bunch of figs like that. Long D'Out has a couple figs like that. There's a lot of English brown turkey types. There's a lot of Celeste types. There's a lot of Atriano Canadria types. So the point is, do your research and get the opinion of many people. Many people. When I make a decision nowadays on what I want to add, I'm looking for at least 3 to 5 opinions on that fig before I decide, okay, yeah, I'll try it. I'll try to grow it and see what happens. Because there's a ton of people out there that have already grown these varieties. Why should I grow them myself when I can just ask somebody that has done it before? You know, it doesn't make sense. Well, you might be thinking, oh, well, you know, I'm afraid to ask people I don't know stuff. They might get annoyed with me or snappy or whatever. I will say one thing that I've done super well since I started growing fig trees is that I've asked a shit ton of questions, an incredible amount of questions. I bug the shit out of people. I do. ASC Pete, he knows if he's watching this video. He knows I bug the crap out of him. I've asked that guy. Oh. And we're back, I guess. That was interesting. I'm not going to edit that out because I think it's kind of funny. But, yeah, I'm sure ASC Pete could tell you firsthand I've asked him a ton of questions. But that's how you learn, That's how you learn anything, is you ask questions. So don't be afraid to reach out to people and say, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about this? The large majority of the time, people will help you. There are very helpful people out there, very knowledgeable people out there. Just because they don't have a crazy reputation doesn't mean they don't know anything. There's a lot of people out there that know a lot about figs. Yet at the same time, though, I don't want to say you should ask just about anyone, because I think some people don't know as much as you would think. In fact, I think the community as a whole is relatively new to growing figs. So you can't take everything that someone says to heart. You just have to kind of formulate your own opinion based on many opinions of others, I think is really a good way to put it. Yeah, and I think another thing that will really help you during this season is just talking to people and making friends. You don't necessarily need to ask them questions, but become friends with people and be a part of the community. I think it is a little daunting because there's so many of us in the beginning, and you don't know anyone, and people are not as nice in the beginning because they don't know you, and people are not willing to give you as many things or trade you as many things because they don't know you, which is totally understandable. You're on the internet, but you just need to be open and try to get along with people and be nice to people and just make yourself known in the community, and people will reach out to you. They will, for sure. My friend Raphael, he said that at the Staten Island Fig Festival, and it's true. People eventually do reach out, and you get to know just about everyone. Some people it takes a little bit longer than others. I know it does help that if you live in a specific area, like I live in Pennsylvania, and it's crazy how many Pennsylvanians have reached out to me and become my friends. Some of them I've met in person, which is another great way to do it. Is if there's a fig gathering and you can go. You should. It was the Staten Island Fig Festival is an incredible place to go near me. Bass's Fig Gathering, again, another great place to meet people. So yeah, just get active in the community, and you will be surprised. You will. I can't. It's hard to put into words exactly how important I think this is. It's immensely important that you become active in the community and make some friends in the community. Just the other day, I got a few people offered to send me cuttings for free. Why did they do that? I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm such a nice guy. But you'd be surprised how many people are very generous and willing to help you and willing to get you started, or maybe they have a variety they think is under the radar, or maybe they have a variety they really just believe in and it's just not as well known, and people don't want it as much, so they're willing to give it to you. People are just very, very nice. It's true. I only had one problem with someone ever. So I think it's pretty easy to get along with people if you're nice. And not only does getting along with people and becoming friends with people help you build your collection, but also just being active on the forums will help you build your collection too, because there's many times that people will offer cuttings for free, just for absolutely not for like postage, just just for the work they put into it, the amount of time and the postage it took them to put into it. So it's very easy to build your collection, and these are pretty respectable varieties too. It's not like someone last year, someone on Figs for Fun, he just gave away a couple Prado cuttings just for chipping, Emerald Strawberry and Prado, and I was lucky enough to be one of the people that got them. Not that it rooted for me, but I was lucky enough to get it, and that saved me a bunch of money in the end, or it could have saved me a bunch of money in just trying to get this variety in general. So you never know what's going to be on the forums. You never know who's going to be offering cuttings. There's people that are offering cutting packages, where they'll put like 5 or 6 varieties in a package and they'll send them out to people. It's just, I mean, if you haven't taken my advice on this yet and you're just not convinced, this is probably the best piece of advice I can personally give. That is the best piece of advice I can give. So another way to do it is, if you're not going to get them directly from friends or from the community, another way to do it is to contact some of these sellers directly. And sometimes, if you're nice enough and you're a good enough buyer, and you've been buying from these people maybe for a little bit of time, you're interested, they might recognize that and give you a cheaper price. There's plenty of times where I've gotten cuttings for pretty inexpensively from people. Some people, they have a whole variety of lists that they'll send you and just will sell you cuttings. I know Harvey, he does that around wintertime. Mountain Figs, Tony, he has a list of cuttings that he puts on his website that he sells. And it's just a better way of doing it versus getting them off eBay. I think eBay is probably your last resort when getting cuttings. Last resort. If it's a variety that you absolutely know that you want, and you're not going to probably get it without being on eBay, then that's when you should be on eBay. That's the only time. So now that you understand cutting season, and you understand how to get these cuttings, now I think it's important to know what to do with them. And there's many different methods, many. Personally, I think parafilm is your best friend. I really like tree pots, I really like parafilm, and I really like soilless medias when rooting cuttings. If you're rooting cuttings in soil and dirt, I don't think that's a good idea. They're going to get moldy, they're going to stay too wet, and they're going to get moldy, and then the cutting's going to die, and you're not going to have success. I would stick with cocoa core and perlite, or just cocoa core, or peat moss and perlite, or just peat moss. There's a very thin line there when making sure that your peat moss and cocoa core are damp. You don't want them too wet. But you want them wet enough to increase the humidity around cuttings. And it's much easier to get a cutting to rot with excess water if it's a very thin cutting. So you have to kind of think about it. A thicker cutting won't dry out as easily. It won't root as easily, and it also won't rot as easily. So there's good and bad to it. If you had a really thick cutting, like a log almost, you probably would want to root that in dirt, because the more moisture you can get to that thicker cutting, the better off it's going to be, the easier it's going to root. The most important thing when rooting cuttings that you need to know is that for a cutting to grow roots and for a cutting to leaf out, you need to have two main things going on. One is humidity and one's temperature, okay? You want very high humidity, like 90% to 100%. And that's in the soil, you know. You don't need humidity above the soil. The reason why people suggest you have humidity above the soil is because you don't want the cutting to dry out. Now, if you're using something like parafilm, you don't need a high humidity environment. And what happens is that if you wrap the cutting tightly enough in parafilm, you really need to stretch it, by the way. If you don't stretch it and you just wrap it real loosely around it, it's not going to do anything, and the cutting's going to dry out. I made that mistake plenty of times. So you really need to stretch it, wrap it, stretch it, wrap it, stretch it, you know, so that it's tightly around it. There's no air in between the parafilm and the cutting. But if you do that, what will happen is the buds of the cutting will break through the parafilm, and it'll be fully adjusted to the humidity in the air. You don't need a high humidity environment. The tricky thing, though, is that if you do that and you don't have the proper root system to support that leaf growth, then you might have a problem, because the leaves will die. But the good thing is, usually the cutting will recognize that and say, hey, I'm putting out a leaf, but I really don't have the water uptake from my roots to support that, so it won't put out too many leaves yet before it has enough roots. Then once it gets some roots, you really want to keep watering it. You don't want to rot it, obviously. You want to keep it moist still, but you want to make sure that there's enough water in there so that it's still uptaking water. What I did is that I rooted most of my cuttings in the wintertime. I rooted the original cuttings I had in the wintertime, probably my most expensive varieties. And that was a bad idea, because I didn't exactly know what I was doing. I thought I did. I thought it was much easier than it looked. Or it looks easy, but it's not. It's not easy at all. You really need to get a feel for it. You need to choose the right method. You need to have all the right things, because if you're missing one little piece, the whole thing is just ruined. So what I would suggest is, don't use extremely rare or expensive or even varieties that you want. Use something that you don't want, or something that's just a cheap variety, and practice with that, and practice for like 2 months and see if in that 2-month period, how successful were you. And then you'll get an idea of a percentage in your head of what your rooting rate is, and whether or not you feel comfortable or not to root more cuttings. You don't need to start rooting now. You know, this is the beginning of the fall. You don't need to do it now. The earlier you do it, it just gives you a more earlier start to your cuttings, and then by the end of the season, when the spring starts, you'll have like a pretty respectable tree, and you'll probably get some fruit off of that tree that year, which is nice. But it's not the end all be all. For me, I learned more throughout the wintertime and the fall, so that by the spring I really knew what the hell I was doing, and I rooted the majority of my cuttings in the spring, and it was a lot better. It was. I still had to learn some things, because it was a different environment. You know, you were dealing with the sun rather than a grow light, but I think doing it outside is actually just better. I think it's a little easier, and it's a lot less. There's a lot less requirements. Like, if you did it indoors, you need grow lights, you need this, you need that. It's like you got to have everything in one area, whereas if you're outside, it's okay if you make a mess, it's okay if you do this, it's okay, you know. So, you know, don't feel like you're pressured to do this now. This isn't like a thing you have to do now. I've had plenty of cuttings that I started in the beginning of the spring, and if you take care of them and you keep giving them water, you fertilize them, you up pot them, they could be pretty well rooted and pretty tall trees by the end of the summer. So, you know, don't feel pressure to do that. If you are going to do something indoors, you're going to need lights, and I don't think you need to go crazy with the lights. I think simple shop lights with bulbs in them, like a 4-foot shop light fixture that you can just plug in, is probably the best way to do it. And you can get the bulbs you want. You can go with LEDs, you can go with fluorescents, it doesn't matter. It's just that the distance between the plants, the leaves, and the light has to be different. So if it's a fluorescent, you want the fluorescent lights a couple inches away from the plants. If it's an LED bulb, you want the LED bulbs much further away, maybe like 3 to 5 feet, up to I think it works even up to 15 feet. Don't quote me on that. So if that's really the only thing you really need to worry about. The other thing that you could pay attention to, but I really don't think it's too necessary, is color temperature of the bulbs. And there's a number on every single bulb that you buy. Usually if you go to like Lowe's or something, they'll have like a display of like each color temperature just in like a line. That's like, one's like real homey, you know, it's real like it's like a warm light, and then it goes more into like a bright white light, all the way to the end where you get like a light that's perfect for inspecting bodies in like a morgue or something. You know, like a typical morgue, you'd see like these really bright white lights that makes everyone look like their skin, like they're from Britain or something, and everyone's pale as hell. So you want the color temperature that you want them on either side of the spectrum. So you want it goes from like I don't know what the lowest number is, but I think the lowest I've seen is 1800 K up to like 6000 K. So you want like one that's in the 6000 range, like 6000, 5000, and you want one that's in like 1800s, 2700, 2100, that range, because then that'll cover the entire spectrum of light, of color, that will mimic the sun as close as you can. Personally, I'm only using 4000 bulbs, 4000 K, which does the job just fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. Really go as cheap as you can, because this, you might find that rooting cuttings just sucks. You might find that you don't want to root cuttings ever again. You might go through this cutting season and say, I hate rooting cuttings, I'm never doing this. I'm only trading plants, and I'm only grafting. That's pretty much what I've turned into, is that I'll root cuttings, but only if I absolutely have to. I don't want too many cuttings that I have to deal with. I'd much rather graft. It's much more fun. It's more rewarding. It's something new you can learn, which is a lot of fun. There's a lot of different ways to do it. I think it's more abrupt in the response, I think. Whereas it might take the same amount of time to graft something as it does to completely root something. But I think it's more, you see the effect quicker. And since it's on a rootstock, then it really just takes off. So that's what I personally do. I have a bunch of rootstocks ready. Some varieties I don't want anymore. A lot of air layers I took of varieties that people just don't necessarily want. And you know, that's what I'm doing, is I have a bunch of rootstock ready for the spring, so that when I'm doing my grafting, I have something to graft onto. And you can see a couple of videos I did on, I grafted a Smith fig tree onto a brown turkey, and then I air layered that, and then I have that whole rootstock I can use again. So it's really interesting, and there's a lot of different things you can do with that. And again, this still applies to cutting season, because you need a cutting to graft. So don't think that rooting is your only option. The other thing I want to say, this is a good tip of advice, is like use guinea pig varieties to test. I already talked about this. Use guinea pigs varieties to like try to practice your rooting skills, but also have backups ready. So like, only if you have like a couple black Madeira cuttings and you're like, oh my god, I really need black Madeira, only root one of your black Madeira cuttings and put the other one in storage. So that way, if your first one fails, you still have a second one that you can bring in and try it again. And storage is a big thing too. And I think storage has a lot to do with originally the quality of the cutting. There's many ways to store them. Again, there's many ways to do everything, but you know, it's pretty simple, and I think, like I said, it just comes down to originally the quality and the care the person that sent it to you put into the cuttings, and then secondly, the quality and care that you have kept them in. You know, the person that sends it to you, it could be at like its perfect percentage. It could be like 100% like chance this cutting's gonna root, and then like as time goes on, that number just slowly diminishes because maybe you're doing something wrong, or it's just the fact that sheer amounts of time is going by. If you're planning to do your rooting in the spring, I would wait until the spring to buy most of your cuttings. People in California, that things go dormant later for them, that's a good time to get it from them. If you're getting stuff from overseas, again, that's a good time to get stuff from them. If you're doing it now, get stuff from people on the East Coast, you know? And you really want them to be dormant. You don't want, I mean, it's okay if they're green cuttings, but you really want to wait until they're dormant. I wouldn't buy a cutting right now unless I knew it was from someone where their season's pretty much dormant. I mean, you can force your trees into a dormancy period quicker, but making sure they're dormant is going to increase your success. You also want them freshly cut. You don't want someone that cut them and then literally just stuck them in their fridge for like 2 months and was like, hey, I have these cuttings left over, let me just see if I can sell them. You know, that's not really that great. I mean, that's not and you can tell when you get the cuttings, you can tell that there's some that are much better quality than others, and there's a lot of people I would recommend you get cuttings from. The source of your cutting is super important. There's a lot of scammers out there on eBay. Do your research on the scammers, for real. Like, you could be wasting crap tons of money on a really expensive variety only to find out that it's just a brown turkey. You know, I can't believe they're a thing, because scammers only exist if there's people that are actually getting scammed. So don't get scammed and there won't be scammers. You know, and not only that, but sometimes people just, you know, they mix up their cuttings, or they mix up a variety, or maybe they thought that variety was something that it's not, you know. Whereas if you buy stuff from a trusted source, then you almost have like a guarantee. Lots of people will have a guarantee on their cuttings. Like, if it turns out to be something else, then, you know, I'll give you a refund or I'll send you something else. So make sure that when you're getting this stuff, it's from someone that's a reliable source. Some people that I dealt with in the past that I would recommend that sell cuttings, Mountain Figs, he's a great seller. His name's Tony. Harvey's a good seller. Driveway Farmer, his name's Kerry. He's probably has the best quality cuttings I've gotten. Mountain Figs probably has the cheapest cuttings I've bought. There's quite a few. I actually made a post titled "A Big Thank You to the Community," and I put my thoughts on everyone I traded with last year, everyone I bought from last year, and you can look that up on the forums if you want, and you'll see all the people that I recommend. But those three are the main ones coming to mind right now. So yeah, your source is very important. now that you know how, okay, so you know about cutting season, you know about rooting them, you know about how to get them, you know about who to get them from, you know, all that stuff. Now I think the last thing really is talking about storing them. And storing them is a little tricky because you want moisture in when you store them, but you also don't want moisture because you don't want them to dry out, but you also don't want them to be wet, because if they're wet, that increases chance for mold, and then if they get moldy, then they're dead. You have to throw them out. So I would let them dry out. Normally, if a cutting has water in it, it's gonna, if you put it in the fridge, which is where you should put them, in the fridge, in the crisper drawer, they're gonna have water that's like, they give off humidity off the cutting, especially because you're gonna wrap them in like saran wrap, plastic wrap. It depends on where you live. You might call it something else, but saran wrap is a great way to do it. It's like a food wrap, and then you wrap that as tightly as you can, and then you put that in like a bag, and then seal that bag and make sure there's no air in it, and that's usually a good way to do it. I've also just wrapped my cuttings in paper towels, and then put the paper towels in a plastic bag and got rid of all the air in the bag. I think the most important thing is the water. You don't want them to be wet, and you don't want them to be in an environment where the temperatures are too high. The lower the temperatures are, the less chance there are for mold. You don't want to put them in the freezer either. That's a bad idea. But you don't want them in a high temperature environment. I took all of my cuttings out of the fridge, put them in a room that was like 50 or so degrees, and then I'm sure that's like a ticking time bomb. You know, the longer they're in there for, like that 100% percentage just keeps dropping, you know. The one more thing I want to mention is like the length of the cutting. There's a lot of people that have done experiments and tried to figure out what the right length is for cuttings, or the right thickness for cuttings. And I think the longer the cutting is, probably the better it is off for you. You can get away with one-note cuttings. There's a guy named Charlie who did an experiment who did it, and I did some this year myself. It's much harder to do. I wouldn't recommend it unless you're really good at it, unless you're really good at rooting. Get a long cutting, get a long container, like a tree pot, like a 4-inch by 9-inch container. Stick the cutting in there, you know, keep it off the bottom so that the roots can grow. And there's, you know, that's usually the most moist part of the container, is the bottom of the container. So you don't want the bottom of your cutting getting rot because it's too moist down there. So you want to keep it off the bottom, but you want as many nodes in the soil as you can. That's going to increase your chances for as many roots as you can get. And then you also want 1 or 2 nodes above the soil. So if you think about it, something like a garlic bulb, you know, you want to plant your biggest cloves of garlic rather than your smallest cloves, because the smaller cloves have a harder time growing roots and a harder time sprouting out leaves. So it's the same thing with cuttings, is that you want a bigger cutting that's going to have more energy. Now if it's a thicker cutting, it's going to be more difficult to root, but the roots it does send out are going to be really thick. So there is like a trade-off there. Yeah, so this was Ross. It was a long video. I hope you guys got through the whole thing. But this is really what I've learned, and I think no one has ever done this before, make a video on this whole thing and talked about it. So I hope that a lot of the newbies out there, even though this might have been a little boring for you, maybe a little bit too many pauses in between words or whatever, but I hope you got something out of it. So this is Ross, and again, thanks for watching.